The sun was at its zenith over Brookfield Heights, casting crisp shadows across the meticulously maintained lawns and opulent townhouses. In this tranquil afternoon setting, Donovan Miles, a gentleman approaching his late 40s, found a quiet corner near the community pool to unwind. The reflection of the cerulean water danced over his face as he leaned back on a lounge chair, savoring a rare moment of respite from the usual rigors of daily life. Despite his calm demeanor and understated presence, there was a subtle air of authority in the way Donovan carried himself, though most of his neighbors simply saw him as another resident enjoying the sunshine. Located on the outskirts of Willow Glen, Brookfield Heights was known for its high property values and even higher sense of exclusivity. Many who lived there prided themselves on the neighborhood's pristine image. Donovan, however, saw it less as a place to flaunt status and more as a haven of serenity. Having moved there a few years prior, he had grown accustomed to the leisurely rhythm of poolside afternoons and walks through manicured gardens. The hush that lay over the community at midday was something he'd come to cherish. As he reclined by the pool, Donovan couldn't help but notice the swaying palm trees that fringed the sparkling water. Their fronds rustled softly in the gentle breeze, a soothing counterpoint to the occasional splash from children playing at the far end of the enclosure. He allowed himself a moment to relish the warmth against his skin, a simple pleasure that reminded him that life wasn't always defined by deadlines or responsibilities. In the midst of this peaceful reverie, a faint sense of curiosity tugged at him. He had noticed a few unfamiliar faces around the pool earlier, newcomers to Brookfield Heights, no doubt. Donovan often made it a point to introduce himself to fresh arrivals, but he hadn't had the chance this time. Between his own busy schedule and the private nature of the neighborhood, opportunities for casual greetings were sometimes scarce. Still, he believed in building a sense of community where neighbors recognized and respected each other. Glancing around, he noticed a woman he couldn't recall having seen before. Her posture was upright and her expression suggested a certain determination, a look reminiscent of someone on a mission. Donovan mentally filed the observation away, deciding he would welcome her if they crossed paths. For now, though, he allowed the murmur of the water and the hush of the midday lull to draw him back into relaxation. Little did he know, that gentle hum of a sunny afternoon was about to be interrupted. In a matter of moments, a simple question of residency would escalate into a confrontation that would ripple through Brookfield Heights, a reminder that even in the most exclusive enclaves, tensions can surface without warning, and appearances can be deceiving. For Donovan Miles, the day had begun in serene simplicity, but the unfolding hours would prove anything but ordinary. The stillness of the afternoon at Brookfield Heights was soon broken by the measured click of heels against the concrete poolside. Marilyn Chadwick, a relatively new resident in the community, had arrived. Dressed in an immaculate sundress, she walked with an air of confidence that bordered on condescension. As she scanned the pool area, her gaze landed on Donovan Miles, who was perched on a lounge chair, still basking in the gentle warmth of the sun. From Donovan's vantage point, Marilyn's purposeful stride and sharp eyes hinted that she had an agenda. Before he could rise to greet her, she halted a few steps away, casting a pointed look at his relaxed form. "Good afternoon," she said, her tone polite yet edged with disapproval. "I'm guessing you're visiting someone here." Donovan, momentarily taken aback by the unwelcoming tone, set aside the book he'd been reading. "Afternoon," he replied evenly. "I live in this community, actually." Marilyn hesitated, her brow furrowing. It was clear she was skeptical of his statement. "You live here?" she repeated, as though the concept were foreign. "I don't recall seeing you at any of the association meetings or gatherings. Are you sure you're in the right place?" Donovan maintained his composure, refusing to let her suspicion rattle him. "I'm quite sure," he said, offering a small, placating smile. "I've lived in Brookfield Heights for a few years now, though I haven't been to many social events lately." "Busy schedule, I suppose." Marilyn's eyes flickered with doubt. Whether it was due to his relatively low profile or some other assumption, she seemed determined to probe further. "Well, we've had a few incidents of uninvited individuals using our pool," she explained, feigning concern. I'm just doing my part to ensure that everything remains secure. Donovan inclined his head, acknowledging her point. Security is important, he agreed diplomatically. That's one reason I appreciate living here. I can assure you, though, that I have every right to enjoy the facilities. For a moment, the conversation hung in the air, teetering between polite inquiry and unwarranted suspicion. Nearby, a few other residents cast curious glances in their direction. Word of Marilyn Chadwick's bold approach had started to ripple outward, stirring a subtle undercurrent of tension in the otherwise placid scene. I see, Marilyn finally said, her voice slightly cooler than before. The social niceties remained intact, but Donovan could sense that her doubts were far from dispelled. Well, if you insist that you live here, I suppose we'll have to verify that. Though Donovan was confident in his right to be there, a flicker of apprehension stirred in him at her insinuation. He nodded calmly, deciding to remain cooperative, at least for the moment. After all, the last thing he wanted was to provoke a scene. But as the afternoon light continued to glint off the water's surface, he had a growing sense that this encounter was only beginning, and that Marilyn Chadwick's entitled insistence would soon escalate into something far more consequential. No sooner had Donovan Miles asserted his residency than Marilyn Chadwick pressed him for further proof. With a clipped tone and folded arms, she demanded that he provide definitive evidence, an address, a key card, or anything else that might confirm he belonged at Brookfield Heights. The abruptness of her request made it clear that she wasn't convinced by simple conversation alone. Adhering to his calm demeanor, Donovan offered a concise response. I live in Unit 213, near the north entrance. I've been in that unit for several years now. He spoke levelly, hoping that a straightforward explanation would quell her doubts. However, Marilyn's skeptical expression only deepened, as though she refused to believe his words without tangible proof. That unit? She repeated, her voice tinged with open disbelief. I happen to know the family in that place, and you're definitely not them. Her eyes narrowed, reflecting a stubborn refusal to accept his statement at face value. It was as if she'd already constructed a narrative where Donovan was an intruder with no legitimate claim. The subtle hostility in her tone piqued the curiosity of a few onlookers who had begun to pick up on the escalating situation. Some shifted uncomfortably in their lounge chairs, while others edged a bit closer, their expression sympathetic toward Donovan. In the hush that followed, the tension between him and Marilyn grew more palpable. Donovan sensed that she wasn't just questioning him, she was challenging his very presence in the community. I appreciate your concern for security, Donovan said, choosing his words carefully. But I assure you, the details you have about Unit 213 might be out of date. People come and go here, and property changes hands. Marilyn pursed her lips, clearly unsatisfied with the explanation. If that's the case, you should have a resident pass, or at least some identification to show me. The demand came across more like an order than a request, feeding the uneasy atmosphere around them. Nearby residents exchanged glances. Some looked irritated by Marilyn's approach, while others seemed uncertain, unsure how to intervene in a dispute that was quickly spiraling out of control. Donovan made eye contact with a neighbor he recognized, a brief moment of silent support passing between them, but neither said a word. Perhaps they, too, felt that offering assistance might only inflame the confrontation. Taking a measured breath, Donovan decided to stand his ground with quiet determination. I've provided my address, and I'm well within my rights to use the pool, he said, letting a hint of firmness undercut his otherwise polite tone. If you insist on verification, perhaps we can speak with the management office. They have records of every resident. The mild suggestion did little to calm Marilyn, who stiffened, her displeasure evident. I'm going to call security, she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut through the murmurs of the onlooking residents. In that instant, Donovan realized that what had begun as a simple statement of his address had transformed into a confrontation that threatened to overshadow the entire afternoon at Brookfield Heights, a confrontation that would soon bring more attention, and more revelations, than anyone there expected. With tension coiling around them like a drawn bowstring, Marilyn Chadwick wasted no time in following through on her vow. She stepped aside, phone in hand, and dialed the community's security hotline. From his spot near the shimmering pool waters, Donovan Miles watched with a mix of disbelief and resignation. It was clear that any shred of neighborly courtesy had dissolved, replaced by Marilyn's determination to paint him as an unwelcome intruder. As she spoke curtly into the phone, Marilyn's words echoed across the tranquil surroundings of Brookfield Heights. "Yes, I need security at the pool area immediately. There's someone here who doesn't belong, he's trespassing and lying about where he lives." Her voice rose enough for nearby residents to hear, drawing even more onlookers as curious neighbors began inching closer. In the uneasy hush that followed, Donovan took a moment to center himself. He was no stranger to tense situations. Though most of his neighbors only saw him as a quiet presence at community gatherings, few were aware of the challenges he navigated daily. The faint lines at the corners of his eyes and the subtle confidence in his stance hinted at someone who had learned to remain calm under pressure. Yet, even his composure was tested by the accusatory glare in Marilyn's eyes. It wasn't long before a security officer arrived, a uniformed man who strode into the pool area with the practiced air of someone used to resolving petty disputes. Spotting Marilyn's raised hand, he approached the pair, his expression a blend of professionalism and curiosity. Before the officer could speak, Marilyn launched into her version of events. "I'm telling you, officer, this man is lying about being a resident in Unit 213. I've seen the occupant of that unit, and he's definitely not it." Donovan stepped forward, documents discreetly clutched in his hand. "I'm Donovan Miles," he began in a steady voice, "and I do live here. If we need verification, I have my ID and any other proof you might require." The security officer took in the exchange with a measured gaze. However, before he could properly review Donovan's paperwork, recognition dawned on his features. His eyes lit up with a mixture of familiarity and respect. "Mr. Miles," he said, his tone shifting, "I didn't realize it was you, sir." The officer nodded apologetically, tipping his cap slightly as though acknowledging someone of higher standing. Marilyn blinked, momentarily disarmed. Her sharp demeanor faltered as the officer turned to her with a faintly admonishing look. "I know Mr. Miles from the board meetings," the officer explained, then shot Donovan a slight smile. "He's also the chief of the Willow Glen Public Safety Office, and he's been instrumental in coordinating our new community-wide security initiatives." A ripple of surprise moved through the crowd of onlookers. The mention of Donovan's role as the city's top public safety official cast the entire confrontation in a new light. Marilyn's posture changed from aggressive to defensive in seconds, her cheeks flushing with the realization of what she'd done. Sensing the shift, Donovan calmly produced a slim wallet from his back pocket and flashed a badge, confirming the officer's statement. Murmurs spread among neighbors who had once watched the spectacle with a mixture of curiosity and discomfort. Throughout the entire scene, Donovan maintained his unflappable composure. "Yes," he addressed the small gathering, "I've been involved in improving our neighborhood's safety measures. That's one reason I appreciate the thoroughness of our security staff. I only wish it wasn't invoked under these circumstances." Marilyn, confronted by the hard truth of her mistake, struggled to form coherent words. The arrogance in her gaze wavered, replaced by a flustered humiliation she could barely contain. I didn't realize," she stammered. "I just thought," Donovan offered her a polite but firm nod. "I understand your concern for safety," he said, "but perhaps it's wise to verify information more carefully before making assumptions." Those gathered around the pool, residents who had initially been uncertain how to respond, began to show support for Donovan. Some nodded their agreement with his words, while others directed critical stares at Marilyn. The officer, recognizing that the tension had largely diffused, stepped aside, allowing the conversation to continue without his immediate intervention. Slowly, with an air of defeat, Marilyn lowered her gaze. She realized that her attempts to cast Donovan as a trespasser had backfired spectacularly. The hush that fell over the crowd was finally broken by her muttered apology. "I'm sorry for the misunderstanding, I only wanted to keep the neighborhood safe." Nodding in acknowledgement, Donovan accepted her words without malice. "It's all right," he said simply, though the undertone of disappointment in his voice was clear. In that moment, the day's drama drew to a quiet close, leaving in its wake an unmistakable lesson about presumptions and the importance of community understanding. The bright afternoon sun still glinted off the water, but the mood around the pool had shifted, a subtle, lasting reminder that outward appearances can often mask deeper truths, even in the peaceful confines of Brookfield Heights. After the heated confrontation at the pool, news of the incident involving Donovan Miles and Marilyn Chadwick spread quickly through the tranquil enclave of Brookfield Heights. Gossip and speculation began to ripple across social gatherings and online message boards, where neighbors debated the line between vigilance and prejudice. Though the poolside drama had ended, its echoes lingered, prompting a wave of conversations about the assumptions people make when they see someone who doesn't fit their preconceived notions. Despite the initial tension, Donovan carried on with his daily routine. Being chief of the Willow Glen Public Safety Office meant long hours and significant responsibilities, but it also gave him a perspective on the complexities of human behavior, how fear, miscommunication, and bias can intersect to produce fraught situations. If anything, the incident reaffirmed his commitment to building better relationships between citizens and the institutions meant to protect them. Still, the memory of the confrontation at the pool weighed on his mind. Meanwhile, Marilyn Chadwick found herself in an uncomfortable position of her own making. The image of her accusing the local public safety chief of trespassing had circulated among her neighbors, and though some empathized with her desire for heightened security, many more saw it as a stark case of misplaced suspicion. Eager to salvage her reputation, Marilyn attempted to control the narrative, offering half-hearted explanations that she'd been misinformed about who lived in Unit 213. Yet, in a small community where everyone shared the same sidewalks and corner stores, her protests did little to quell the whispers. As days passed, a growing number of Brookfield Heights residents voiced their support for Donovan. Some approached him in person, offering apologies for not intervening sooner. Others sent messages to the neighborhood's online forum, praising him for his calm and measured handling of the altercation. Among these voices was a couple who had only overheard the incident from a distance but felt compelled to speak up once they discovered Donovan's role and the full story behind his identity. Spurred by the wave of community introspection, a meeting was organized at the local clubhouse. Advertised as a discussion on strengthening neighborhood unity, it quickly became a platform for neighbors to share concerns, reflect on the poolside confrontation, and find ways to prevent future misunderstandings. Donovan, though initially hesitant to attend, preferring to keep a low profile, was encouraged by several residents who valued his insights, both as a homeowner and a public safety leader. Reluctantly, he agreed to speak, realizing that if anything good could come from the ordeal, it might be a more cohesive community. The night of the meeting, the clubhouse buzzed with subdued energy. Rows of chairs faced a small podium, and the walls were decorated with welcoming posters about fostering harmony. A hush fell when Donovan rose to speak. He didn't dwell on the personal slight he had experienced. Instead, he used the moment to address the broader implications of making unfounded assumptions. "We all want to feel safe," he began, his voice calm and resonant. "But fear should never overshadow our capacity for neighborliness and empathy." Marilyn, seated near the back of the room, listened with a mixture of embarrassment and begrudging admiration. Though she had privately considered avoiding the gathering, a friend had persuaded her that showing up was the first step toward making amends. As Donovan spoke about the intersection of privacy, security, and human decency, she recognized in his words the qualities she had lacked that day by the pool: patience, respect, and understanding. When the floor opened to questions, a lively exchange ensued. Some attendees proposed stricter community guidelines, while others argued for more personal liberties. A recurring theme was the necessity of trust in neighbors to act responsibly and trust in local authorities to address genuine threats. Donovan's perspective, shaped by his professional experience, resonated with those who worried about being either too lenient or too guarded. In an unexpected turn, Marilyn raised her hand. With measured humility, she spoke about her initial fears, admitting that her strong reaction had been misguided. "I believed I was protecting our community," she said quietly, but I realize now how quickly fear can distort our judgment. Though a few neighbors regarded her with skepticism, Donovan nodded, offering the slightest of smiles, as if to acknowledge her courage in speaking at all. By the meeting's end, it was clear that the poolside encounter had become a catalyst for broader reflection in Brookfield Heights. Plans were made for new resident orientations, so that neighbors could more easily recognize one another. Discussions arose about ways to ensure that safety measures didn't evolve into vigilantism or bias. And in a gesture of reconciliation, Donovan offered a handshake to Marilyn, who accepted it with evident relief. The walk home under the lamplit streets felt different to Donovan. The tension that had colored his perception of the community seemed replaced with cautious optimism. He still had reservations, habits of wariness were hard to shake, after all, but the promise of a more open-minded neighborhood gave him hope. In the days that followed, the community's efforts to embrace transparency and unity continued. The confrontation that began at the pool had not simply faded from memory. Rather, it evolved into a shared story about the perils of snapping to conclusions and the power of dialogue in bridging divides. And while Donovan Miles resumed his role at the Willow Glen Public Safety Office with the same dedication as ever, he carried within him a renewed belief that even small gestures of empathy and understanding could turn an embarrassing conflict into an opportunity for genuine, lasting growth.